fascinating, and what a great new developing market it is there that we could certainly look at exploring going forward. Our next presenter has spent nearly 30 years focusing on the structure and dynamics of the food service industry across Europe. His expertise is regularly sought by both television and radio and the Bank of England. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Managing Director of Horizons, Peter Beckman.
Fine, thank you. Thank you very much. And good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here for the second year. Horizons was sponsors last year, and we're supporting the event again this year, and it's great to see you all. I apologize for my throat. Last night, my voice disappeared, and I thought I wasn't going to be able to talk at all. Unfortunately, it's come back, so you have to listen to me for a quarter of an hour. Anyway, here we go. Or don't. My button's not working. Help me, somebody, please. Anyway, I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about Europe and its structure and draw some conclusions from that. And then I'm going to talk about what are some of the trends that we're seeing, sort of supporting the points that Aaron has just been making, but going into it in a slightly different way. So here are some big numbers about Europe, and when I talk about Europe, we're talking from the snowy lands, North Scandinavia, Russia, that part, right down to the Mediterranean, from Iceland out in the Atlantic, through to Turkey and Russia, bordering on Asia. So we're talking about a large area, but we're actually talking about a very complicated area, and to try and cover it all in 15 minutes is not possible. So I'm going to try and distill it all into some numbers and to some interesting information. We're 773 million people. The food service market, as I'm going to define it shortly, but that's basically in restaurants and in hotels, is worth $526 billion. The total market is worth $526 billion. The restaurant, quick service, drinking place, and hotel segment is worth $240 billion. If you compare that with the US, which has shown the world how to eat out, like it or not, and it's done it exceptionally well, that market consists of 310 million people in the States, Europe 773 million, over twice as many. When it comes to the total eating out market, the 240 billion that I mentioned, that compares with almost double in the States. Half the population, double the eating out. That points to some element of growth. I'm not saying that Europe is ever going to reach the levels that we see in the US, because there are all sorts of cultural factors at work. If we look at it in terms of per capita in Europe, the total eating out market, although I've got a picture of somebody eating a burger, I'm not just talking quick service, I'm talking everything from eating in hotels through to burgers and the very popular end of the market. But in the States, the figure is $1,500 per person per year. In Europe, it's $310, 5 times per person as much as eaten out in the US. But in Europe, we're seeing big differences. In France, it's $697 billion, $697 per person. I wish we were all that rich. In Moldova, on the other hand, it's $17 a head. Huge variations. The game is actually being played, the eating out game is actually being played in just 5 countries. That's the UK, Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. Between them, they account for 41% of the US population, of the European population, equivalent to the US population. So in a sense, they are a mini US. That market, those 5 countries account for 77% of the eating out that goes on in the popular segment and hotels in Europe. The market is worth, in those 5 countries, is worth 185 billion, compared with 493 billion in the States. So the same population, but reduced total market. So again, we're looking at huge potential even within the well-established larger European economies. And of course, just a note here, these economies generally are not doing at all well. Risk of deflation exists. Unemployment is at very high levels, over 11% in the Eurozone, and GDP is hardly growing. So we are in a very awkward and difficult and trying place at the moment. But nevertheless, there is potential. We're not going to be in this place forever, and we'll get back to the good times in Europe. And at the same time, some parts of the market are doing very well. And eating out is one of those segments which is actually performing very well in terms of growth, and particularly in terms of innovation. The 5 countries that I've talked about are equally represented in full service restaurants and quick service restaurants, drinking places, which is primarily a UK phenomenon, is also quite significant, and hotels. We do a lot of eating out in hotels for a whole variety of factors, not merely to have a meal out, but in conferences, a room service, and a whole range of other things. So those 5 countries actually reflect roughly what the whole European market looks like. So although I'm sort of picking on those countries, they are not unique. So where is the movement in the market coming from? Well, I think there's a number of factors. Where there are young people coming along, and not everybody in Europe is young, some countries are getting older. Around the western edges, generally people are getting older, and particularly in the middle. Where the economy is growing and growing faster than normal, faster than average, and here we're talking about countries towards the eastern part of Europe, countries like Poland and Czechoslovakia are showing quite very good growth in the food service market. And where there is a culture of innovation, because consumers, as they grow up, as they get more adventurous, like to have new things presented to them. So the traditional cuisine in various countries, each country has its own cuisine, the consumers are moving well beyond that now and are looking for new, exciting foods that they can find in so many different places. The sectors that are growing are those that are offering value, and of course value doesn't only mean cheap. Historically, in Western Europe, the fast food business was a major driver of growth through the 80s and into the 90s. We're now seeing that phenomenon in less developed European countries. And the countries that grew up with fast food 20 years ago are now moving much more into the segments that Aaron talked about. We've seen huge developments in terms of real value, but not necessarily cheap offers. And the operations that can show excitement are growing, and those that can fit with changing lifestyles and expectations. So healthy food, international, and so on. These are elements which are pushing the European food service market substantially. And they tie very much in with what Aaron said earlier. And the companies that are successful are those that can match all of those things and show how they can make them work. So who are these countries? Well, this is the 25 leading food service brands in Europe by sales, expressed in dollars. I've used dollars because we don't have a single currency that we can use of our own, so I have to borrow the dollar for this type of work. McDonald's is way ahead of anybody. It goes off the scale here, and it's by far the most ubiquitous and the most developed brand in terms of consumer perception, and it fits in well both with the established economies and the emerging ones with it throughout Europe. But there's a whole host of other brands. There are two different colors here. So the bluish one is quick service, and the pink one is full service. And of course, the noticeable thing about this is that the full service brands really dominate the market. Overall, these 25 brands have 19% of the eating out market throughout Europe, have helped enormously by McDonald's, and I'm going to unfortunately have to come back and put that all into perspective. But there are a range of other brands that are in the food service, in the full restaurant service segment, down towards the lower end of this chart. But bear in mind, this is 25 brands out of literally tens of thousands of brands throughout Europe. The inspiration for these brands comes from, and I've said it before, from the United States. So in each of these pie charts here, the US is the blue bit. The first one in the top left-hand corner looks at the top 25, and I've grouped them into countries. US, particularly McDonald's, 3/4 of the top 25 brands. Then the UK, then France, and then one or two other countries. In terms of, if we just separate out quick service, then the US really, that's the US market, with Europeans learning from American brands how to do these things. So the US is way ahead in terms of quick service, but when it comes to full service, it's the UK. So there are two countries represented here, the US, which Aaron's talked about, and the UK. And I'd just like to focus for a second on the UK market and look at the 25 leading groups. So these are not individual brands. Some of these groups own a number. And again, McDonald's is the number one, but it doesn't have the paramount presence that it has across Europe. And then a range of other companies, including ones that are represented in the drinking segment. There's been some movement in here, and I just want to point this out. So there have been a couple of companies which have been floated recently, SSP being one, and TGI Fridays being another. So there's been some movement in terms of refinancing and new ownership. More parochially, within some of the segments, some of the countries, Green King, a pub company, is just in the process of buying Spirit, which is another pub company, moving it up the chart. On the other hand, Gondola Group, which owned Pizza Express, and Ask and Zizzy, has effectively been split up, and Traeger has lost its Strada brand. So there is movement going on in the ownership here. And we're seeing a number of other bigger things, not only in the UK, but across Europe. And I'm just going to sort of use the last couple of minutes just to identify 5 issues that seem to be important. One is the space race. This is food service outlets beginning to colonizing new areas, empty, vacant spaces in shopping malls, in transport hubs, and anywhere where people are transient but can be persuaded to spend some money because either they've got time to spare or because they're really getting hungry. So the space race is a way of maximizing income in large areas where there are not enough, where there's opportunities to serve more food. Secondly, operators are needing to sweat their assets, using their own space more effectively, eking out little areas so they can serve more food. Or time. Breakfast is a growing development across Europe. This is an example from McDonald's. Retail and food service are blurring, and we're seeing this in a whole variety of different ways, and we're seeing pop-ups, and we're seeing street food coming along. We're seeing Tesco in the UK buying Giraffe and Harrison Hall and using those brands to grow their own business. Service and technology are coming together. Consumers using technology all the time, Just Eat aggregating orders, using information behind the scenes to help run businesses more effectively and to use information. And finally, what is happening? There's a whole range of new offers on the plate. This comes from some work that we do regularly in the UK, but we've checked out all of these things, and all of these things are happening throughout Europe. So there's a whole range of new flavors and experiences coming along. There you have it, Europe. It's a continent of contrasts. It's large, but it's very fragmented. It's staid, but it's hugely innovative. It's inspirational, and it's changing. Thank you very much.